Here's what Dawn Staley said at the trophy presentation about Caitlin Clark.
And I want to personally thank Caitlin Clark for lifting up our sport. She carried a heavy load for our sport. And it just is not going to stop here on the collegiate tour. But when she is the #1 pick in the WNBA draft, she's gonna lift that league up as well. So Caitlin Clark, if you're out there, you are one of the GOATs of our games, and we appreciate you.
That was strong, and I assume Caitlin appreciated that. But Saturday, Dawn Staley said that Caitlin did need to win this championship to be recognized as the GOAT. So, Rachel, do you agree she needed a championship for all-time greatest validation?
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, even if she had won, I wouldn't necessarily have said that she was the greatest of all time, right? Breanna Stewart is a 4-time champ, 3-time player of the year. Candace Parker, 2-time champ, right? 2-time player of the year. Taurasi, 3-time national championship. I will still say Cheryl Miller, I would put her up against anyone. And Reggie Miller will tell you he's not, as a Hall of Famer, the best player in his own family. So I don't know whether you would have called her the GOAT either way. She is not the greatest player of all time in college women's basketball to me. She is the most influential player of all time in women's college basketball to me. And by the way, just because she's not the greatest of all time doesn't mean, as Dawn Staley says, she's one of the greats. She is one of the greats of the game. She is just not the greatest of all time. The influence she has had on women's college basketball and women's sports is going to be felt for a very long time. Those TV numbers, the interest of the country, is something that not just women's college players are going to be able to talk about and present as, hey, we're just as good. We deserve just as much. We also deserve meals at the Final Four. Remember, just a couple years ago, women were posting on their Instagram, we got this little sandwich pack while the guys have a full spread. That's not going to happen anymore because of Caitlin Clark. The WNBA, as she said, is going to get a lift because of Caitlin Clark. But this is going to extend. If you're a women's soccer league, you are going to go in to the broadcast meeting and say, you better pay us because people will watch women's sports. Here is the evidence. And I think it's going to have even a ripple effect beyond that. Now, I'm not equating her to Billie Jean King. That was a different time and a different scenario. But I will tell you this. When Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs, you had secretaries going into their office the next day demanding equal pay. I think, and I said it in the first segment, there are kids who have been watching Caitlin Clark who now believe they are as good as any of the little boys in their class next to them in a way that maybe they didn't before a year or two ago. And you cannot underestimate the power of that. I can tell you a personal story. I grew up in Washington, D.C. Christine Brennan was the beat reporter for the Washington Post for the football team there. I just assumed that there were women who covered the NFL, because I grew up reading her. Guess what? She was the only one. But I didn't know that because I grew up reading her. So as far as I was concerned, I could do that, no problem. And I think there are girls all around the country who are saying, I could do something like that, whether it's in basketball or not. I think she is the most influential person we have seen, and that is fine without her being the greatest college basketball player ever.
You know, she moves the needle. That's what she does. Now, as far as, you know how I feel about GOAT, Skip. I don't get, because it's always subjective on how you look at it.
Okay, but it's what we do.
I understand. I understand it's what we do, but I can do it the way I do it. Let everybody else do it the way they do it. She can't be considered the all-time GOAT, okay, if you want to go down that road, because she hadn't won a championship. You just ran off names, just crazy names, and we missed many of them along the way because there's so many that have won championships along with the statistical numbers and all the other things that they was able to accomplish in college. But her scoring, we can't argue. The effect on the game, we can't argue. Moving the needle, we can't argue, right? Because when you look at it, this was perfectly set up for her to be considered the GOAT by many people. All she had to do was win the championship. All she had to do was win a championship. That didn't happen. You're not going to have a conversation with somebody being the GOAT that doesn't have a championship. You're just not. It's just not in football, Dan Marino. Nobody talks about Dan Marino. Dan Marino was one of the best quarterbacks to ever lace him up.
He was the greatest thrower of the football I ever saw.
Exactly, but
But he's not the greatest quarterback of all time. You would tell us that.
Because he doesn't have that championship, so he doesn't even get into that conversation.
Well, he needed a couple, actually.
He needed a couple. I mean, eventually it became a couple because, obviously, Brady set a different standard in Montana and things of that nature. She has nothing
by the way, Dan did get to a Super Bowl and ran into Joe Montana.
Yeah, but she has nothing to be ashamed about. The conversation on what she is as a player will continue to live on, just like Rachel said, her influence on the game, away from the game, and on to the next level of pros, we're going to see all of that. Ticket prices are going to go up. Revenue sharing for women's sports is going to go up. All of those sort of things. Now, look, a large majority of it, based on the last couple of years, the eyeballs was on her. But all of these young ladies that played in these tournaments and these games all contributed to those numbers going up, okay? Angel Reese and LSU contributed to those numbers going up. South Carolina and Don Staley in her team contributed to those numbers going up. Kaylin just happens to be right in the middle of all of that at that point in time in this era where, for whatever reason, in the last couple of years, it just clicked. It just clicked the last couple of years out of nowhere, where all of a sudden, women's basketball in particular just shot through the roof.
But I wouldn't say it's out of nowhere. I wouldn't. I think she's standing on the shoulders of these incredible women.
When I say out of nowhere, it went from here like that, like overnight.
This is a combination of the competition getting better, more girls being allowed to play sports at a more elite level. Right now, all of a sudden, over the last 10, 20 years, you have travel basketball teams that you didn't have.
No, it was steady.
It was this kind of thing.
Momentum coming, but Rachel, it just shot up.
But that is a lot because the men's game crumbled.
Yeah, the men's game.
So you had, we talked about this earlier in the show.
You're not there. We haven't talked about it. We haven't mentioned it.
I'm not that interested tonight.
Because of that, and because we just talked about, in the women's game, you had players staying longer. Rivalries are allowed to build. You had people who came for Caitlin Clark to this tournament who now know about Paige Beckers. They now know about Juju. They now know about some of these players, and they're still going to tune in next year. And that's going to happen in the WNBA again next year. People who only know Caitlin Clark and who have never watched a WNBA game, they're going to want to watch one of those games. She is, of course, projected to be drafted by the Fever. The Las Vegas Aces, who are a huge draw in and of themselves, have already, before Caitlin Clark had even finished playing her college career, moved their game against Indiana into the full-time 20,000-seat basketball arena. They are going to play in a 20,000-seat basketball arena this Aces Fever game in a game that Caitlin Clark will eventually be in, but hadn't even finished playing college. That's the power of Caitlin Clark.
It is.
That she made them change venues before she even got drafted onto a team of an opponent. Right?
And Ice Cube already offered her $5 million to come play in the Big Three.
I think she's going to make more than that next year with her endorsements and everything else. I just think that the effect she is going to have, people come for her, then they look around, they see, oh, well, these women are actually pretty good. The WNBA is deep, man. There aren't that many jobs to be had. There aren't the same number of jobs there are on an NBA franchises because there aren't as many teams, right? Yep. So you have players down the line who are better in some cases because they got to fight to keep their jobs in a smaller market.
I'm going back to our original question. Did she need a championship to validate? I'm going to leave the influential off to the side. I'm going to talk about the basketball. I'm going to talk about what I kept seeing all year long from her team, or rather what I didn't see from her team. And I argued with Paul Pierce on Thursday and Friday. Paul thought her team was very good. I thought it was very average to below average. And I think we saw that yesterday because the rest of the team got exposed by a really good and deep, 10-deep South Carolina team. So I'm looking at the draw, and I thought she was in the NCAA put her in the region of death. And I'm thinking, how are you going to get out of here? Because it's loaded with Pac-12 teams, all of which were very good, starting with your team. But the point was, I'm thinking, you have to deal with LSU as a 3 seed? Are you kidding me? I thought there's no way they could beat LSU, and there shouldn't have been a way. But remember, obviously, Angel turned her ankle late in the first half, and I think she was a shell of herself in the second half because she went, what was it, 1 for 10? She scored 2 points in the second half. And then I had my doubts about Friday night because I think that Connecticut's team is better than Iowa's team. I thought they were much deeper and better 5-on-5. And it went to the wire, and it took a terrible call I still don't get it. A moving screen call that denied UConn and probably Paige Beckers a last shot at winning the game.
What's that? Moving screen.
Yeah, it's a moving screen. Okay, well, whatever. I thought it was a terrible call.
3 seconds ago, you call that, though?
Yeah,
That's a different question.
wouldn't. All right. So the point was, I'm looking yesterday, and I tweeted this before the game, so I'm first guessing. I just didn't think there was any hope unless she went completely three-point crazy, which she is capable of doing. So now I'm back to the question. Yeah, if she had beaten South Carolina sort of single-handedly yesterday, then I'm sitting back saying, I got to rethink this a little bit.
It's a discussion, but you know what?
You're knocking off a 37-0 team at that point.
Yes, so I think it would have been a discussion.
If you got LSU and you got Connecticut's dynastic, not that they're a dynasty now, but the magnitude of that program and that coach, and then you turn right around and do it again to South Carolina on the biggest stage, I got to have a conversation here.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least as the one-year greatest achievement ever in women's college basketball, that nobody's ever done that. Breanna Stewart was but like off the charts tremendous because, as you say, 4 times, and she was the MOP, the most outstanding player, 4 straight times. But her supporting cast, trust me, was way, way better than what Caitlin was dealing with yesterday.
Look, if she had won a title, this would... Is she the GOAT? Is certainly a valid conversation.
Yeah.
But I still would say it would not have been an automatic. Sheryl Swoopes won a title and scored 47 points in the title game. So we have seen players do electric things like that. Yeah. But to your point, Key, without a title, it's not even a conversation. And that's okay, by the way. You don't have to be the greatest player of all time to, A, be the most impactful player of all time, which I think she is, and to then also be a raging success, which she is going to be.
Okay. So what did she do? What were her biggest accomplishments on the floor? She was the greatest distance shooter we've ever seen. So she was the female Steph Curry in revolutionizing the way women play basketball because we'd never seen that before. And we got to see it in the first quarter on full display yesterday because there was one where she pulled up almost on the logo. And when she launches, she does it so effortlessly. I always think it's going to be short. And then it goes in, and I'm thinking, how did that go in? It went in. Well, she's done it very consistently. She's a 40+% three-point shooter. What else does she do? I can make a case that she's the greatest passer of the basketball in women's basketball that I've seen. And I'm going to go way back on you because I know what I'm speaking about, to Nancy Lieberman. And it's way before even your time, way before your time.
I know Nancy Lieberman. Okay. She played in Dallas for the Diamonds. Come on, man.
Hey. She could pass it. They called her Lady Magic because she could pass it.
We didn't see her in college.
No, I'm messing with
It was Old Dominion, yeah. Okay, so the point was, Caitlin can really pass the basketball, but she's not spectacular. She's not, Nancy Lieberman's behind the back, between the legs, you know, like, but what she will do, she'll push it full court, like 3/4 court. She did it 4 or 5 times yesterday, and her teammates couldn't cash it because it's hard to catch it on the dead run, and then all of a sudden you've got Camilla looming over you, swatting it. But she is not a good passer. She is an all-time great passer. It's textbook passing. But Paul Pierce was so impressed with her on Friday as a passer of the basketball because she gets it.
She had 12 assists against UConn?
Yeah, she did. And it's high basketball IQ. She had, didn't she have 14 against LSU? Yeah. Okay, so you got the combination of greatest distance shooter and one of, if not the greatest passer of the basketball. That's a hard combination because it puts her in an identity crisis. Well, are you a shoot-first point guard or what are you? She is the ultimate scoring point guard who can do both because you don't usually see it in the NBA. If you can shoot it and you're the point guard, you usually average 4 assists because you're mostly shooting the ball, right?
That's why Steph Curry is such a good comp, right?
Yeah.
Because Steph Curry is such an underrated passer. He is. Right? Knowing where to go, the way he's able to get his teammates the ball, the cuts that he makes, the way they are cutting around him. And I think if you look at one of the best broadcast calls I've heard this year, Caitlin Clark from the future. Did you catch that?
That was
a great.
That was
a great line. And I think that we are absolutely, and I think that we are watching that when we watch her three-point game. You wouldn't call Steph Curry the GOAT of college basketball, would you? Would you ever say that he was the greatest player to ever play college basketball? Okay, no. Yes, but would you call him? That's my point.
No.
Right. Thank you. Now, his NBA success.
Listen, I used to get crushed on ESPN for saying Steph should be drafted ahead of Blake Griffin in that draft. And I'll do it again. I'll take it right now.
But just because...
You're not taking a small versus a big, athletic big that could dunk and do... It just,
I know,
back then, they wasn't doing that.
But you saw a revolutionary shooter, and you saw point guard skills, even though he was the two guard
But you would never argue, even with those skills, that he was the GOAT of college basketball.
No.
So the same point, you're not arguing that about Caitlin Clark. And by the way, if she has a Steph Curry career in professional basketball, right? So I think this paradox is she can't be the GOAT without winning a title. There's no question about that.
Yeah,
even if she had won a title, I personally would hold her up against some of those other players I listed and said,